So to begin, as president of WCG, I'm just going to share a few announcements. WCG would like to say thank you to the 2024 to 2025 sponsors, including University Products, Space Saver Interiors, Dorfman Museum Figures, Caring for Textiles, Click Netherfield, Gaylord Archival, Small Corp, Ontaco Laser Solutions, and Truvio. Their donations enable WCG to provide networking events, educational programming, honoraria for speakers, and free admission for members to attend historic venue tours. The next WCG meeting will be the annual Three Ring Circus on January 9th. This program is generously supported by the Smithsonian National Collections Program and will be hosted in person at the S. Dillon Ripley Center. An official announcement will be released soon, so do keep your eyes out for that. Finally, please mark your calendars for Saturday, March 15th. That will be the date of our 2025 Community Partnership Project for condition assessments and rehousing of selected artifacts from the Naval Lodge Number 4 collection, based in Capitol Hill in the Eastern Market neighborhood. A few minutes after I finish speaking, I will post a link to the volunteer announcement in the chat so that if you are interested in this program, you can sign up. Thank you all for listening, and I will next pass it to WCG Director Linda Owen, who will introduce tonight's speaker.
Thanks, Kira. So tonight I am going to introduce Jeff Larry, who is the Director of Presentation at President Lincoln's Cottage. And he's going to speak to us tonight about the discovery and exposure of mid-19th century decorative painting on the plaster walls of President Lincoln's Cottage. So Jeff joined the staff at President Lincoln's Cottage in January 2008, where his role in leading the preservation department includes research, documentation, and either doing or supervising any of the ongoing preservation and restoration projects at the site. He started his career as sole proprietor of a restoration business in Burlington, Vermont, soon after receiving a BA in historic preservation from Mary Washington College in 1996. After moving to Washington, D.C. in 2004, he completed projects on several local historic homes and sites, including the Decatur House and the south porch of the Old Naval Hospital, a building commissioned by Abraham Lincoln in 1864 to be the district's first naval hospital. In addition to his work at the cottage, Jeff uses his preservation and project management skills to bring improvements to his community in Baltimore. He serves on the board of the Charles Village Community Foundation, an organization that provides grants for groups and individuals whose projects will enhance the neighborhood's quality of life. He is a board member of the Friends of 26th Street, a community-led group that manages and maintains the 26th Street Green, a park created from a city street in 2021. And he is a volunteer member of his local library's facilities committee, where he has performed pro bono restoration work, developed a cyclical maintenance plan, and managed numerous restoration projects to the slate roof, brickwork, interior surfaces, and gardens. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jeff for his presentation.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for stopping in here tonight. I am particularly excited about this presentation. I do a number of different talks or presentations throughout the year, but it's typically with architectural historians or historic preservationists, and I haven't had the opportunity yet to share or tell the story of our discovery of this decorative painting. So I'm really interested also in if you all, when we're done here, if you have any insight or observations or shared experiences similar to this. Though what would be really amazing is if you looked at one of these pieces and said something like, oh, that looks like the work of so-and-so who was in Washington City in the mid-19th century. So that would be amazing. So I've got this structured. I'm going to do just a quick, brief introduction. I know a lot of you are going to be coming to the site on Saturday, and you'll get all of that information, and then I'll just jump into it's two rooms. It's the parlor and the entry hall, and I'm just going to talk about the reasons why we chose these rooms. The reasons are different for each of the rooms. The techniques that I used to do the exposures. the results and then plans for the future. Because honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do with these things. So if anyone has any good ideas, I'm happy to hear about them. So let me get started here. All right. Okay, are we up? Everybody can see me all right here, and this is good. So this is President Lincoln's cottage. This is a photograph taken circa 1863. This was the time period when the Lincolns were in residence here. They used the cottage as their summer home from June to November of 1862, 63, and 64. And the cottage is located probably about 2.5 miles north of the capital. At the time, this was the countryside. It actually wasn't even in the district. It was considered Washington County. Sorry. And the house was built probably about 20 years prior in what was then still a very early style of architecture for America. It was Gothic revival, but more specifically, rural Gothic revival. And the house was built for a man named George Riggs and his family. Riggs was a Washington banker. If you've been in DC for any amount of time, you might remember Riggs Bank. Well, he was the co-founder of Riggs Bank with his neighbor, William Corcoran. And Riggs and his family lived in the cottage for about 9 years. And in 1851, he sold the property and the 250 acres to the federal government, because the government wanted to establish what was then called a military asylum. Basically, it was a retirement home for enlisted men of the Army. And the first residence, so if you look in this picture here, the building in the center, that's the cottage. All right, so the first inmates, as they were sort of unfortunately known, moved into the cottage in 1852. And then in 1855, they moved next door because this building was completed. It's called Sherman Hall. So that was the first dormitory for the soldiers' home. And then these two buildings over here on the left, you kind of can't see them very well. They're behind the trees. But that's quarters 1 and quarters 2. And those were built to be the governor and deputy governor's residences at the soldiers' home. So it's these 4 buildings that make up the original historic core of the soldiers' home. And they were designated a National Historic Landmark in 1973. And then in 2000, President Clinton designated just the cottage a national monument. And that began what ended up being an 8-year, $15 million restoration of the cottage and rehabilitation of our adjacent visitor education center. And this was an effort that was led by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Up until 2016, we were a National Trust site. But in 2016, we spun off. We are now what is called a co-stewardship site. Montpelier and Drayton Hall are also co-stewardship sites. So we still have a relationship with the National Trust, but we are a self-governed, independent historic site. All right, well, let's move on to the parlor. So here's the parlor. In 2001, I had closed down the room because we were going to be doing a series of repairs and preservation work and other things in there. And I had read in a paint analysis from 2002 by Frank Welsh that suggested there was decorative painting at the Frieze. So I thought, well, I'll just do a tiny exposure, a postage stamp size exposure. And when I got to the oldest layer, the original layer, it was this bright blue. And I had never seen anything like that anywhere in the cottage, that color. And I thought, I have to make this larger. So I did some experiments on the lower portion of the wall. We know there was no decorative painting down there, but I wanted to figure out the best paint stripper to use. So I had well, it wasn't a methyl chloride because you can't really get that anymore, but it was something akin to that. And then the orange citrus stripper, and did different time trials and just, okay, well, how many layers are removed here and there? And in the end, I ended up going with the citrus stripper. It was much less aggressive. I had more control. It took way longer, but I didn't want a situation where I applied some stripper and then, maybe got called away on some emergency and came back 5 hours later and it had eaten down all through the decorative painting. So I went with the citrus stripper, and basically just a square X-Acto knife, bringing the layers down until I got about 2 layers from the decorative painting. And at that point, I stopped using the stripper and then just did it all by hand. So I'll just sort of run you through the process of how the image kind of began to show itself. So this was in the beginning. And there's that light blue that I mentioned. And it was neat because as I got closer, I could start to actually see the outline through the other layers of paint. And I was able to kind of start to predict where things were going to be. And then you can see this starting to appear. So it turned out that the paint, for the most part, was oil-based, but I found that the yellowish gold paint was water soluble. So there's a lot of that paint that I just left covered. I didn't even touch it. You can see how that went along. And then you'll see this decoration here, and I'll tell you about that in a couple of minutes. So that was basically right there is how it came out. That's probably, I don't know, maybe 3 feet by 2 feet or 3.5 feet. So a couple of things about this. I was really interested in these little dots, which I'm guessing, and if anybody has any thoughts on that, but I'm guessing it might have been some raised plaster element that was just scraped off when the second layer of the second campaign of decorative painting was applied. And that's what you're seeing over here. So this is the second generation of painting, much simpler, meant to sort of imitate a crown molding. So here it is again at a different, another exposure I did at a different part of the wall. So at this point, we didn't have money in the budget to do a full comprehensive paint analysis, but I did have a little bit, and I brought in Matthew Mosca to just basically just do a cross section and kind of give us a sense of what we were looking at layer wise. And what he came up with was that, yes, we had these first 2 early layers, but then what he found, I was very happy for this news, was that he found evidence of an adhesive and paper fragments on top of that second generation. And this was important because in 1864, Mary Lincoln had the Commissioner of Public Works pay for a series of upgrades at the cottage. We have a copy of the invoice, and it came to about it was like $3,200, which in today's money is like $40,000. And it included new curtains, bell pulls, cocoa matting, but it also included wallpaper in 7 large rooms. And, I have found various areas with wallpaper intact, you know, under paint and whatnot over the years, but it was more modern, probably all 20th century. But while working in the parlor, I came across a mouse's nest underneath the floorboards and uncovered these fragments. Now, I am no wallpaper expert, but it's possible. None of the other samples we have that type of fiber to it. You know, so that's as close as I have come to possibly finding what might have been the Mary Lincoln era 1864 wallpaper. All right, so I'm going to jump now to the entry hall. So as I said, the reasons for doing these two different rooms were different. The parlor, honestly, it was just because it was cool and it was fun. And I really wanted to like see this decorative painting. The entry hall was a little bit different story. So we really, since we opened, even before we opened, there were multiple areas on the walls of the entry hall and in the room directly above it where the finish coat, the skim coat of plaster had separated from the base coat. And it is not something that has continued aggressively over the years in any way. Our thoughts are that it might have been, you know, there was probably a good 6 or 7 years where the cottage had no heating, no cooling, no relative humidity controls, and it was probably moving a lot more than it had been used to. And it's possible that that was the reason. So we brought in some conservators to offer some thoughts and some advice on what some products could be to reattach that skim coat of plaster to the base coat. But if I didn't have to do that, you know, then perhaps I wouldn't. So I wanted to do an exposure to see if there was decorative painting. And if there indeed was decorative painting, then yes, absolutely. We were going to save as much of this plaster as possible. There is no decorative painting in the room directly above. So we thought, well, what we could do is if we find the decorative painting, which we did, we can try all three of these products on the second floor. And then just let it sit for a year or maybe more and see how it works, see how it holds up, see which one we liked, which one was easier to use, and then we can kind of move on from there. So here was the start of that removal. Again, the same process, using the citrus stripper with an X-Acto knife, and then stopping about 2 or 3 layers short of the actual decorative painting. Which, by the way, this one did not have 2 decorative painting schemes. It was the decorative painting, and then it was just painted over with lots and lots of yellow paint. And a completely different style and scheme begins to emerge. And so it got to this point, and I thought, okay, we have the information. We know it's here. So we're going to move forward, you know, with trying to save as much of this plaster as possible. And that was winter of 23. So almost 2 years ago. And this image on the right, that's how it stayed for the last 2 years. But I was always sort of curious about this bird here. And in preparation for talking with you all tonight, I thought, you know, I should really just make this bigger. And you know, so I can show it to all you folks. So I set up some scaffolding on Monday. In the last 2 days, I've been slowly revealing what is there. So yeah, that's about how fast it goes right there. And this was the point on the left here when I started to see this, and I thought, that's a weird head. Like, what is this big long eye? And then after, I don't know, a few hours, it revealed itself to be that. And my colleagues and I have been going back and forth on this all day today. Everybody's came over to see it. And there is great debate amongst us on what exactly this thing is. So I'll be curious, you know, at the end of this, if anyone has any opinions on what sort of creature you think this might be. So that is the end as far as the presentation of the two different projects. And I'm open to questions or discussion or however you want to move next.
Great, thanks so much, Jeff. If anyone would like to put their questions, feel free to put them into the chat. Or I think Jeff expressed before that it would be great if we could have more of a discussion format. So if anyone would like to just unmute themselves and ask their question in person, please feel free to go ahead and do that. I have a question just off the bat. So how many layers of paint were there originally, or not originally, but how many layers of paint did you have to go through roughly to get to the sort of original painted?
At least 25.
Wow.
But I was fortunate that there was I would say maybe in the 1930s, there was a really glossy layer. So that probably maybe the latest, I don't know, 10, 12 layers, I was actually able to just cleanly scrape off without any chemical at all, because that layer, it was so glossy and it just hadn't been prepared properly. So it just separated super easily. It was very satisfying.
Nice. It's always satisfying when something goes
Right.
without too many issues or problems. And there aren't any other paint layers underneath this decorative paint.
That's correct. Those are the earliest.
So they're the original, essentially.
Correct. Yeah, so that would be, I mean, they couldn't have painted it right away. So mid 1840s, maybe 1844.
Great. It's fascinating that you were able to salvage the little bits of wallpaper from the mouse's nest. That's really incredible. Have you ever found, so these are the only samples that you think might be the original Mary Lincoln wallpaper in the house?
It so far, there might be more mice nests left unexplored. I haven't poked around too much since then. I think, you know, all of that would be, we've yet to come up with a fuller plan. I mean, a lot of the space, except for the vestibule project, which we did in 2020, has really sort of stayed as it was since we've opened. And I think one of the things that we want to do now is kind of come up with a more long-term plan, because there are other things left to be discovered, and things that I think as they were doing the capital campaign, and they just thought, well, we don't have time and we don't have money to do this, so we'll save that for later. And it's just a matter of sort of choosing which rooms, you know, like the parlor, for example, in the early 20th century, it was partitioned off, and the left half of it, or the west half, was turned into a bathroom. So the stone mantle was removed and is long gone. And it would be great to, you know, sort of come in and say, hey, well, we know that that crown molding decorative painting was present. Let's bring that back. Let's bring back the mantle, and let's, you know, do some more things to help people imagine what the space might have looked like during Lincoln's time. If you've never been to the cottage, it's primarily unfurnished. We don't know what it looked like as far as furnishings on the inside. There are a few sort of period appropriate furnishings, but they're really just sort of more as props. I mean, you can actually sit on the couches and chairs from, you know, from that time period. So I think to have an opportunity to maybe do some of the finishes, that could enhance people's experience when they visit the cottage.
That sounds great. I was curious too, since it is called President Lincoln's Cottage, is there any sort of not institutional pressure, but is there any idea that it should be shown at as it was or as it was imagined to be at Lincoln's time, or do you have the flexibility of pursuing the frieze of the earlier? Is it sort of the whole history of the cottage that you can focus on, or do you have
Yeah, well, I
or do you have
mean,
areas that you need to focus on?
so I would not paint over the Riggs era decorative painting after, and I think as long as it's not, I mean, people love it when they come and see it, and I think it's part of the story of the building that is worth telling. So I would leave it there, but I don't envision us really getting more involved in the Riggs era story beyond maybe these few small little things here. Well, I see there's 3 in the chat. Do I?
Oh, sorry, they are not coming up in my chat. I'm gonna try closing it and reopening it. Oh, well, maybe they're just going directly to you. So if you see
Oh,
some in the chat, go ahead and answer any of the questions you see.
okay. Let me see.
I also have a couple questions in the chat.
A swan. Well, we had that today. One of the questions or comments was looks like a swan, and we had swan. We had goose. We had, oh, I'm forgetting the name of the mythical creature that is half serpent. It's a winged serpent, which we were kind of hoping it's that because that's super cool if we have a winged serpent on the walls of our entry hall. But yeah, I don't know. And and there may be a sort of standard stylized version of whatever the 1840s version of that could be. So
Pam Kirshner was saying that maybe it could be a reference to Leda and the Swan from Greek mythology.
yeah, let me write that down.
And another question came up from Ariana Johnson asking, did you do anything to neutralize the citrus strip?
I wiped it down with just water. Nothing, no chemicals.
It
And
sounds
again, I stopped using it 2, sometimes 3 layers before we got to the decorative painting.
It sounds like attendees can only direct message, so that might be why everyone can't see the questions. So, Jeff, if you see anything else coming up in the chat, feel free to go ahead and answer it. And if anyone wants to just go ahead and ask a question.
Says, hi, Jeff, are there plans to have a portion of the exposed decorative painting in-painted to get an idea of what the complete image looked like originally? That would be great. We actually did that in the vestibule when we uncovered decorative painting of a wainscot. And when we did the exposure, that was Cassie Myers did that. And she went in and in-painted to sort of help us imagine what types of wood that artist was trying to imitate. So yeah, I mean, that would be great. Again, we just need to come up with like a plan, which we just have not done yet. And this, the entry hall one is just so new. But, I feel like I should maybe just do one more to see if we've got this Greek mythology theme going on or whatever, just there is a place above an arched doorway, a big arched doorway that I thought in the corners above those arches would be a really interesting place to explore. It hasn't had much infrastructure intrusion and pipes and wire mold and things going through it. So it looks like it's pretty intact. So, but again, that's, just sort of us needing to put together, a more comprehensive vision. Yeah.
Somebody, Teresa Duff, offered that maybe it could be a phoenix, which I could see because of the
Y-
colorful
Right.
feathers.
We did, that was one that was, that was brought up today as well. Yeah. See if I'm. Oops.
As you're thinking about sort of your plans, I was wondering if you'd thought about maybe having different layers exposed just to show different colors through time, sort of like a stepped presentation or something to going back to the earliest.
Yeah, we did that in the vestibule as well. And then, you can look at it and it's so hard to not be critical of other eras' tastes in paint colors. There was a time period, I guess, in the 60s where every single interior on the entire Soldiers Home campus was painted in that institutional green, which which I've seen plenty of that in the basement here. But yeah, that would be fun too, to have that, to show that history, and it would not be hard. I could still do that with the entry hall one. Yeah, I think that would be great. And that me not being an expert in any way of the particular colors at what period of time, that would be fun to have that. So if, there's an area of dark green, you say, well, that's, you would typically see that in the 1920s, and that could also help us with some dating and other different changes that were going on at the time. And someone said, did you say that there is a clear coating on top of the paint? There, it doesn't seem to be any type of coating, and the paint analysis area that Matthew Mosca did was not in the decorative painting area. It was on the plain painted area just below. It doesn't seem to be, the paint doesn't separate as easily as it does in that one layer of glossy paint. So, and I don't know historically if they would have put any sort of coating on it.
Have you had, would any part of your sort of ongoing project, and sorry if someone already asked this, involve any analysis or pigment analysis to see sort of what the historical pigments were being used? It does look like this sort of mauvey rosy color was very popular at that time in both the parlor and the entry hall. You kind of have.
And the vestibule as
Yeah.
well. We've since painted the walls in the vestibule that color. I think Matthew Mosca called it a mauve.
Mhm.
If there is a coating of varnish on the original paint. Well, like I said, I didn't see anything that would give me that idea. We did have that in the vestibule. It was meant to imitate wainscot with a walnut rails and stiles and a white oak panel. And that did have a little bit of a sheen to it, which made the exposure much easier.
And you mentioned in the parlor, I think, that there was one of the paints was water soluble, the sort of golden color.
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
find any others when you were exposing? Everything else was oil, and then the one
It
was.
was just that yellowy gold. And I haven't tried it on this one yet. It was just basically with a damp rag and just dab it. And that was the only color that I would get a residue on the rag. So
Being a paper conservator, painted finishes are not my area, but I'm wondering,
yeah.
anyone, any of our paintings conservators have any insights in the sort of combination of perhaps an oil-based or a water-based, or if it's just a less bound oil paint and more sensitive to water.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, yeah, it would be difficult to try to get a water-based paint to stick to an oil, but yeah, I don't know. And that would be part, we just have to get the funding to have Matthew come back or someone and do a really in-depth, comprehensive paint analysis, which we just didn't have the money for at the time. But that again would be part of a larger plan, and we would have to say, oh, well, we're going to do the parlor first, we'll do the entry hall. And what was that? Thank you. Someone mentioned they only know of one house painter who roamed the area in the 1840s, George Bridport. Cool.
Maeve suggested it could be a distemper.
Oh, Maeve is on? I can't see who's here. Hi, Maeve. Maeve came out and consulted.
Nice.
A distemper. Mentioned the 2002 paint analysis by Frank Welsh. What information was identified with that? There was no chemical analysis with that at all. It was just, if you know Frank Welsh, you know he is famous for all his reports are handwritten. So it was just pages and pages of handwritten saying, you know, L1 brown, L2 gold, you know, or whatever. That's all that is. No chemical analysis at all. Just sort of commenting on the layers, and then maybe an occasional comment saying, "Oh, this, you know, this could be a wainscot or something like that." Yeah. Maybe FTIR would be helpful. I don't know what FTIR is.
So it's an analytical technique that can be helpful for determining binders and groups. So that might be, in addition, if you wanted to do some more
So that's a chemical analysis?
Yeah, it's like a binder, helpful with looking at binders and chemical groups.
Okay.
Hi, I'm chiming back in. Since we can unmute ourselves, I just wanted to ask a question or just mention it would be, in addition to finding out more about the painted layers, it would also be really cool to know if there were any underdrawings. Not that is something that would likely require, you know, more either imaging or analysis coming in, but it would be really cool to see if the layout was performed in a specific way where things were laid out in advance, or whether with some mural pieces, sometimes there will be like a transfer of an image through through like hole punches in a paper, and so you'll see like an underdrawing where it basically is like dotted, and other times you'll see lines drawn, or other times there may not be any underdrawing at all, but that would also be something really cool to find out in the future.
And like, how would you see that? I guess you would have to remove certain, or are you sometimes able to see that?
So there's different ways to look at that. It would, it definitely would not be recommended to remove any of the painted layer to see it.
Right.
But if you have an area, maybe not the area where the bird is, because there's so much dark paint that likely if that has any carbon black in it, you're not really going to be able to see through that. But if there's an area that that has other colors besides black, if there's a way to capture that image in infrared light, then what that does is the capture will allow you to see through the paint layers. The light will basically travel through the layers of paint and be reflected off of the priming surface underneath the paint. But
Mhm.
anything that's carbon containing, so if it contains graphite or charcoal or other carbon containing materials that might have been used in an underdrawing, those will absorb the light and appear darker in the resulting image. And so
Hmm.
it would be a non-destructive technique that wouldn't affect the paint in any way, but it would be cool to see whether there's any underdrawings underneath those paint layers as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. This was super interesting. Really amazing find with that beautiful bird. Do you have plans or anything in the works for finding more funding for it? Do you think it's a project that can move forward with research and funding, or um, is that not a priority for the overall preservation plan?
No, we don't have immediate plans. We just came off a 5-year run of major projects. And now we're sort of looking ahead. We know we've got a pretty significant amount of sash work, but now that's what we're doing, is looking ahead to say, okay, what do we want to do in the next 5 years or 10 years? I do know that one of the things that we're starting now is a reimagining of our landscape. We did get some funding for a landscape architect to, particularly for starting around the cottage, and separating the landscape into zones. We tasked this landscape architect. We met with a bunch and just sort of said, okay, how do we put in plants that can emulate Lincoln's ideas on justice and liberty, and you can learn about Lincoln through plants. And we found this one local firm and we love them, and they came back with just some really neat ideas where we've broken the beds around the cottage into sort of Lincoln's formative years. So plants from Kentucky and Illinois, the Civil War years, what were some of the other ones we're doing? His grief and his legacy, and Lincoln loved to quote Shakespeare. So plants that are associated with Shakespeare to provide these sort of interesting programming opportunities through the landscape. And without signage, we would do this sort of, you would have something that you would kind of go around, and because we don't want signs everywhere. That was a little digression. Sorry, I'm really excited about this
No,
sort of
it's
thing,
really
but
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of expand your programming, and an interesting way to bring in kind of like live artifacts almost, as kind of curating this new way storytelling. So very interesting, and that could in turn drum up more interest and visitorship, which can lead to more funding for future projects. So all interesting stuff for sure. Thank you.
Well, and I think, after seeing this latest exposure, and the staff, and particularly our director, is very excited. So I think, it is something we're gonna start talking about. Because like I said, there's just so much more of things we definitely know were a certain way during Lincoln's time, and they just were never done back during the Capitol campaign. A series of dried flowers. Oh, cool. So somebody said the Library of Congress just accessioned a series of dried flowers from the White House garden during Lincoln's presidency after Willie's death. Oh, yes. Cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that would go well in the grief section in particular. Nice.
I was wondering if you guys had thought about perhaps trying to do some sort of like crowdsourcing for funding for uncovering more or working on the decorative painting, sort of as visitors can see little bits that have been uncovered, have some kind of didactic panel or something, and then have a way to donate to, so more can be uncovered or more can be learned about the layers of paint. Just an alternative way of raising funds sometimes.
Yeah, we did that with the vestibule
Mhm.
project in different ways, and did some events to sort of groom potential donors and sort of a private experience and say, look, this is what we found so far. This is what we're hoping to do in this space. And that was really successful. Yeah.
Well, I don't, since it sounds like our chat is being a little fickle tonight, so I can't see if anyone else has any questions in the chat, but I want to offer everyone another opportunity to either unmute or to either message Jeff directly or any of us for any final questions. And
Yeah, and if
any
anything,
questions
if
for
anybody,
us too.
yeah, well, if anything comes up and you think of you come across another painter or something, or but yeah, this is just really early days, and that's why I was, just open for conversation and ideas, and so a lot of these comments were really helpful, and I've taken some notes here, so thank you for that.
Thanks. Thank you again, Jeff. This is really, really fun to see kind of an in progress work and those kind of new discoveries. I just wanted to mention also to those of us who are joining on Saturday for the tour, we do have a wait list available. So you can, if you weren't able to sign up for that, you can send an email and see if you can get on the wait list. But that tour is going to be at 1 p.m. And for everyone to meet promptly on time, they said they start right away at 1.
And I can in regarding the tour, I will not be here for the tour. I don't do the regular tours, but the scaffolding is still set up. It's only one level, and there's a ladder right next to it. And I could talk to the tour guide if anyone was interested in going up on the scaffolding and getting a closer
Ooh.
look.
Oh wow, that would be fun.
Yeah, so I'll make
If
sure.
regulations will allow us, yes.
Yeah.
That would be great.
So Paul, his name is Paul, that's going to be giving you the tour. So I'll talk to him and let him know that it's okay if you guys start clambering the scaffolding.
Oh, that would be quite a treat. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I'm very excited to see it.
And if you feel like you want to scrape some paint while you're up there, there's a lot
We'll bring
left to go.
tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff.
All righty. Yeah. Thank you all. This was fun.
Okay, well, I guess if it sounds like we thanks so much for the great conversation and also for the great presentation. It was really interesting and it sounds like it was pretty fruitful for you as well. I know I certainly enjoyed seeing it and really look forward to seeing what you guys do and what you where you go with the preservation and the work on the cottage, both the grounds and inside. So just thank you so much again and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
All right. Thanks so much. And I guess we'll just wrap it up there. So thank you again, everybody, for coming out on this Thursday night virtually. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.